She moved through the hospital corridors with a quiet efficiency that made her invisible to most people. Just another nurse in scrubs checking on patients, monitoring vitals, dispensing medications. For 3 years, Maria Rodriguez had been the kind of healthcare worker that patients remembered fondly and colleagues respected professionally. But nobody looked at twice. Her official employee file listed her as a registered nurse with prior military experience. Nothing more. What it didn't mention was that Hospital Corpsman Maria, Doc Rodriguez, had spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL medical specialist, the only woman ever complete the grueling training and serve on active SEAL teams. And when an armed gunman walked into Metropolitan General Hospital at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, everyone was about to discover that some people are exactly where they need to be when the worst happens. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden strength and protective instincts, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe that heroes come in scrubs as often as they come in uniforms, hit that subscribe button. These stories reveal the warriors who never stopped serving, even after they changed careers. Metropolitan General Hospital in downtown Phoenix served a community of over 400,000 people, operating as a level 1 trauma center that treated everything from routine medical procedures to the most critical emergency cases in the southwestern United States. The facility employed over 2,000 healthcare workers, including 400 registered nurses who worked in rotating shifts to provide 24-hour patient care. Maria Rodriguez had been working the day shift in the cardiac care unit for 3 years, ever since she completed her nursing degree and transitioned from military service to civilian healthcare. At 29, she was younger than most of the senior nurses, but older than the recent graduates, occupying a middle position in the hospital hierarchy that allowed her to work effectively without drawing attention to herself. Her colleagues knew Maria as competent, reliable, and unflappable under pressure, qualities that made her valuable during medical emergencies, but didn't distinguish her from dozens of other experienced nurses. She arrived for her shifts on time, completed her assignments thoroughly, and maintained the kind of professional demeanor that patients and families found reassuring during stressful situations. What her colleagues didn't know was that Maria's composure under pressure came from 8 years of training and experience in situations where lives depended on split-second decisions and perfect execution of medical procedures under combat conditions. Maria's official military record showed service as a Navy Hospital Corpsman from 2012 to 2020, with deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq providing medical support to Marine infantry units. The record was accurate but incomplete. It didn't mention that she had been selected for and completed Navy SEAL training, becoming the first woman to serve as a medical specialist on active SEAL teams. The omission was deliberate. Maria's SEAL service had been classified at levels that made her participation in special operations invisible to anyone without appropriate clearance. Her transition to civilian nursing had been carefully managed to protect both her identity and the operational security of the units she had served with. But old habits die hard, and certain instincts never truly fade. That's why Maria was the first person in the cardiac care unit to notice that something was wrong with the man walking through the hospital's main entrance. It was 2:45 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when Maria spotted the anomaly during her routine check of the unit's patient monitoring systems. Through the large windows that overlooked the hospital's main lobby, she could see a man in his 30s walking toward the information desk with movements that immediately triggered her threat assessment protocols. The man's gait was too deliberate, his posture too rigid, and his attention too focused for someone seeking routine medical services. More concerning, Maria could see the outline of something bulky concealed under his jacket, something that had the size and shape of a weapon. Maria's mind automatically shifted into the threat evaluation mode that she'd used for 8 years in situations where recognizing danger meant the difference between completing the mission and losing team members. The man's behavior suggested someone preparing for violence. His positioning indicated he was scanning for security vulnerabilities, and a concealed weapon represented an immediate danger to everyone in the facility. Maria reached for her phone to alert hospital security, then stopped. If this was a planned attack, the gunman might be monitoring security communications or have accomplices positioned to exploit the response. Calling for help prematurely could escalate the situation before Maria understood what she was dealing with. Instead, Maria did what she'd been trained to do for 8 years. She began reconnaissance and prepared for the worst-case scenario, moving to the cardiac care unit with the same quiet efficiency that made her invisible during normal operations. Maria began positioning herself where she could observe the main lobby while maintaining access to potential weapons and defensive positions. Her 8 years of SEAL training had taught her to evaluate every environment for tactical advantages, and 3 years of working at Metropolitan General had given her intimate knowledge of the hospital's layout, security protocols, and potential vulnerabilities. What Maria saw through the lobby windows confirmed her worst fears. The man had approached the information desk, but instead of asking for directions or patient information, he was demanding access to restricted areas of the hospital. His body language was aggressive, his voice was raised, and Maria could see that he was reaching inside his jacket toward a concealed weapon. For the first time in 3 years, Maria Rodriguez allowed Hospital Corpsman Maria, Doc Rodriguez, to take control. Maria accessed her mental catalog of the hospital's security measures, evacuation procedures, and communication systems. Metropolitan General had protocols for handling violent patients and potential threats, but those procedures assumed that security personnel would have time to respond, and that the threat could be contained through conventional law enforcement methods. That a single gunman with military-grade weapons in a hospital full of patients, families, and medical staff represented a scenario that required immediate action by someone with the training and experience to neutralize the threat before it could harm innocent people. Maria moved to the unit's medication storage area and accessed supplies that could be repurposed for tactical use by someone with her background. Medical facilities contained numerous items that could serve as weapons or defensive tools in the hands of someone who understood their applications. Syringes could deliver incapacitating drugs, medical gases could create diversions, and even basic medical equipment could be used to restrain or disable an attacker. But Maria's most important asset wasn't any piece of equipment. It was 8 years of training in close quarters combat, threat neutralization, and medical intervention under extreme stress. Maria was preparing her response when the situation escalated beyond reconnaissance. At 2:47 p.m., the man in the lobby pulled a semi-automatic pistol from his jacket and fired 2 shots into the ceiling, sending patients, families, and staff diving for cover, while his voice echoed through the facility's public address system. "Everyone listen to me. This hospital is now under my control. Anyone who tries to leave, anyone who calls for help, anyone who doesn't do exactly what I say will be shot." Maria could see through the lobby windows that the gunman was moving toward the elevator banks, apparently intending to access the upper floors where the most vulnerable patients were located. The cardiac care unit where Maria worked contained dozens of patients who couldn't be moved quickly, families who were visiting loved ones, and medical staff who had no training in dealing with armed threats. Maria made the same decision she'd made dozens of times during her SEAL service: neutralize the threat before it could harm innocent people. Maria accessed the hospital's internal communication system and began broadcasting coded messages that would mean nothing to the gunman but would alert key personnel to the nature of the emergency. Her messages used medical terminology that disguised tactical information while providing crucial intelligence to anyone with military training who might be listening. "Attention all staff. We have a code silver situation in the main lobby. Please implement lockdown procedures for all patient care areas. Maintenance personnel should secure all utility access points immediately." The announcement was deliberately vague, but it served multiple purposes. Code Silver was a hospital's designation for a weapon-related emergency. Lockdown procedures would protect patients and staff, and securing utility access points would limit the gunman's ability to cut power or communications. More importantly, Maria's announcement would alert any off-duty police officers, military veterans, or security personnel in the hospital that a coordinated response was being organized by someone with tactical knowledge. Maria then began moving through the hospital's service corridors, using maintenance areas and supply rooms that weren't accessible to the public. Her 3 years of working at Metropolitan General had taught her every shortcut, every hidden passage, and every tactical advantage that the building's layout provided. 8 years of SEAL training had taught her how to use those advantages to hunt dangerous people in confined spaces. Maria's first priority was intelligence gathering. Using security cameras and strategically positioned observation points, she began tracking the gunman's movement through the hospital while assessing his capabilities, weapons, and apparent objectives. What she discovered was both better and worse than she'd expected. The gunman appeared to be acting alone, which eliminated complexity of coordinating against multiple attackers. But he was also carrying more weapons than Maria had initially observed. In addition to the pistol he'd used to announce his presence, he had a tactical knife, additional ammunition, and what appeared to be an improvised explosive device. More concerning, the gunman's movement through the hospital suggested he had specific knowledge of the facility's layout and security procedures. He was avoiding areas with the heaviest security camera coverage, taking routes that would minimize his exposure to potential law enforcement response, and heading toward areas of the hospital that contained the most vulnerable patients. This wasn't a random act of violence or a mental health crisis. This was a planned attack by someone who had studied the hospital's operations and was executing a deliberate plan to cause maximum casualties. Maria realized that she might be the only person in the facility with the training and positioning to prevent a mass casualty event. Moving through the hospital's mechanical areas with a silent precision that had made her one of the most effective medical specialists in Navy SEAL history, Maria began positioning herself to intercept the gunman before he could reach the intensive care units where her patients were located. But as Maria prepared for what might be the most important engagement of her life, she made a discovery that changed everything about the tactical situation. Hidden in a maintenance area near the elevator banks, Maria found evidence that the gunman wasn't working alone after all. Communications equipment, additional weapons, and tactical gear suggested that this was a coordinated attack with multiple participants who were using the hospital's infrastructure to support their operation. Maria was facing not just a single gunman, but a terrorist cell that had infiltrated Metropolitan General Hospital with the intention of taking hostages, controlling critical medical infrastructure, and potentially using patients as human shields. For the first time in 3 years, Hospital Corpsman Maria, Doc. Rodriguez went back to war. Maria's discovery of the additional equipment changed her tactical assessment completely. Instead of dealing with a single disturbed individual, she was facing what appeared to be a coordinated terrorist operation with multiple participants, advanced planning, and sophisticated equipment. Using her phone's camera, Maria documented the hidden equipment cache while simultaneously analyzing its implications. The communications gear suggested coordination with outside support. The additional weapons indicated a sustained operation rather than a brief attack. And the tactical planning materials revealed that the terrorists had been studying Metropolitan General's operation for months. But Maria also noticed something that provided a crucial tactical advantage. The equipment cache was positioned to support an operation that assumed no significant resistance from hospital personnel. The terrorists had planned for security guards and eventual law enforcement response, but they hadn't anticipated encountering someone with her training and capabilities. Maria accessed the hospital's building management system using credentials she'd acquired during her 3 years of employment. Her position as a cardiac care nurse had required her to understand emergency protocols, evacuation procedures, and building systems, knowledge that she could now repurpose for a very different kind of emergency. Maria began systematically modifying the hospital's environmental systems to create tactical advantages while degrading the terrorists' operational capabilities. She activated fire suppression systems in areas where the attackers were positioned, creating confusion and reducing visibility. She sealed electronic locks on doors that would limit their movement while keeping evacuation routes open for staff and patients. Most importantly, Maria activated the hospital's emergency communication system and began broadcasting information that would help any law enforcement or military personnel who might be responding to the situation. This is Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez to any military or law enforcement personnel monitoring emergency frequencies. Metropolitan General Hospital is under coordinated attack by multiple subjects with advanced planning and equipment. Repeat, this is not a single active shooter situation. This is a coordinated terrorist operation. Maria's broadcast violated her cover and revealed her military background, but also provided crucial intelligence that could prevent responding units from walking into a trap designed for conventional law enforcement tactics. Maria then began her hunt for the terrorist team members. Her first target was a communications operator she'd identified from the equipment cache, the person responsible for coordinating the attack and maintaining contact with any outside support. Taking out communications would blind the team to external responses, while creating confusion about the status of their operation. Maria found the communications operator positioned in a supply room near the main elevator banks, monitoring police radio frequencies and coordinating with the gunman who was moving to the hospital. The operator was focused on his equipment, completely unaware that he was being stalked by someone with 8 years of experience in eliminating high-value targets. Maria's approach was silent, professional, and devastating. The communications operator was unconscious and secured within 30 seconds, his equipment confiscated, and his radio credentials compromised. One target down, a known number remaining. But Maria's elimination of the communications operator had an immediate effect on the terrorist team's coordination. The gunman in the main hospital began calling for status updates that would never be answered, and Maria could monitor his increasing confusion and frustration to the radio equipment she captured. Maria's second target was the gunman himself, the visible component of the terrorist operation, who was threatening patients and staff while his teammates worked on their primary objectives. But approaching an armed and increasingly agitated terrorist in a hospital full of innocent people required tactics that balanced aggression with the need to protect civilians. Maria used the hospital's layout to her advantage, moving through areas that weren't accessible to gunmen, while using security cameras to track his position and predict his movements. She could see that he was becoming more erratic as his communications failed, which made him more dangerous but also more predictable. Maria intercepted the gunman in a corridor between the emergency department and the main elevator banks, using a combination of medical supplies and improvised weapons to neutralize the threat without risking harm to any nearby patients or staff. The confrontation lasted less than 15 seconds. Maria's training in close-quarters combat, combined with her knowledge of human anatomy and her access to medical supplies that could incapacitate without killing, allowed her to eliminate the gunman with the kind precise, control violence that left him alive for interrogation, but unable to pose any further threat. 2 down, but Maria's analysis of the equipment cache suggested at least one more team member remained. Maria secured the gunman's weapons and communication equipment, then used his radio to monitor any remaining terrorist communications. What she heard confirmed her assessment of the threat level. This had been a 3-person operation with a 3rd member positioned, complete the mission even if the others were compromised. The 3rd terrorist was located in the hospital's critical care areas, where he had apparently been preparing to take hostages among the most vulnerable patients. Maria could hear him through the radio trying to contact his teammates, becoming increasingly urgent as he realized that his operation was falling apart. Maria's approach to the 3rd terrorist required even more careful planning, because he was positioned in areas where any violent confrontation could directly endanger patients who couldn't be moved to safety. The critical care units contained people on life support, patients recovering from surgery, and individuals whose medical conditions made them completely dependent on the hospital systems and staff. Maria couldn't use the aggressive tactics that had worked against the first 2 terrorists. Instead, she had to rely on stealth, precision, and her medical knowledge to neutralize the threat without putting any patients at risk. Maria accessed the critical care units through maintenance areas that connected to the patient monitoring systems. Her 3 years of working in these units had given her detailed knowledge of every piece of equipment, every staff routine, and every potential advantage that the environment might provide. What Maria found was a terrorist who was increasingly desperate and unpredictable, holding several patients and their families hostage while trying to establish communication with support elements that were never going to respond. Maria realized that the situation required not just tactical skills, but the kind of psychological assessment and crisis management that she learned during her medical training. The terrorist was armed and dangerous, but he was also isolated, confused, and operated without the support structure that his plan had depended on. Maria made a decision that combined her SEAL training with her medical expertise. Instead of eliminating the terrorist through violence, she would neutralize him through medical intervention. Using her access to the hospital's medication systems and her knowledge of pharmacology, Maria prepared a combination of drugs that would render the terrorist unconscious without endangering any of the patients in the area. The drugs could be delivered through the hospital's ventilation system, affecting only the terrorists while leaving patients and staff unharmed. The plan required precise timing and careful execution, but offered the possibility of ending the terrorist threat without any additional violence in an area full of vulnerable people. Maria implemented her plan over the course of 20 minutes, gradually introducing the drug combination into the air circulation system while monitoring its effects through security cameras. The terrorists began showing signs of disorientation and decreased coordination, but it remained functional long enough for Maria to position herself for the final phase of the operation. When the drugs had reduced the terrorists to a manageable threat level, Maria moved into the critical care unit, wearing full protective gear and medical credentials that allowed her to approach the situation as a healthcare provider rather than a combatant. "Sir, I'm a nurse. I can see that you're not feeling well. Let me help you and make sure everyone here gets the medical attention they need." The terrorist, now significantly impaired by the drugs Maria had administered, was unable to maintain his aggressive posture or effectively threaten the patients and families he'd been holding hostage. Maria was able to disarm him and secure him using medical restraints while providing immediate care to any patients who had been traumatized by the ordeal. 3 terrorists neutralized, 0 casualties among patients or staff, and a coordinated attack prevented by a single nurse who had never stopped being a Navy SEAL. Maria secured the terrorists' weapons and communications equipment, then used the hospital's PA system to make an announcement that would officially end the crisis. "This is Hospital Corpsman Maria. The facility is secure. All terrorist subjects have been neutralized and are in custody. Repeat, Metropolitan General Hospital is secure. Normal operations may resume." 20 minutes later, the hospital was swarming with FBI agents, local police, bomb disposal units, and federal counterterrorism specialists who arrived to find the situation already resolved by a nurse whose military background had been completely unknown to her civilian colleagues. But Maria Rodriguez, registered nurse, had already begun the process of returning to her normal duties, checking on patients, monitoring vital signs, and providing the kind of compassionate healthcare that had motivated her career transition in the first place. The federal debriefing lasted 18 hours and involved representatives from the FBI, Homeland Security, the Navy, and several agencies whose names were never mentioned in Maria's presence. The 3 terrorists were identified as members of a domestic extremist group who had planned to take hostages at the hospital while demanding the release of imprisoned associates. The terrorist intelligence had been accurate about the hospital security procedures and staff capabilities, but completely wrong about the background of at least one employee. They had prepared for resistance from security guards and eventual law enforcement response, but they had never imagined that their target facility was protected by a Navy SEAL medical specialist with 8 years of experience in exactly the kind of operations they were attempting. The hospital staff became local heroes, with newspapers praising the brave healthcare workers who helped coordinate the response to armed terrorists. Maria Rodriguez was mentioned in the reports as hospital personnel who assisted in neutralizing the threat and caring for affected patients. That was exactly how Maria preferred it. 6 weeks later, Maria was back to her regular routine, working day shifts in the cardiac care unit, monitoring patients, administering medications, and providing the kind of compassionate nursing care that made her popular with patients and families. The hospital had upgraded its security systems and added additional personnel, but Maria's duties remained essentially unchanged. Most people treated her exactly the same as they had before, but Maria noticed small differences. Hospital administrators nodded with a different kind of respect. Security supervisors seemed to understand that she brought unusual capabilities to routine situations, and several of the veteran staff members who had served in the military appeared to recognize that there was more to the quiet nurse than met the eye. 3 months after the terrorist attack, Maria received a visit from a Navy officer who identified himself as Captain Williams and carried credentials that Maria recognized as belonging to Naval Special Warfare Command. Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez, Captain Williams said during a brief conversation in the hospital's parking lot. There are people in Coronado who are very impressed with your actions during the terrorist incident. People will remember exactly what you accomplished during your active service and exactly what you prevented here at Metropolitan General. Maria didn't respond, but Captain Williams continued anyway. Those same people want you to know that if you ever decide that civilian nursing isn't as fulfilling as you thought it would be, there are opportunities available. Training positions, operational medicine roles, advisory assignments, the kind of jobs where your unique combination of medical expertise and tactical experience would be invaluable. Captain Williams paused, watching Maria's reaction. The Navy needs experienced medical specialists who can operate in high-threat environments. Your demonstrated ability to provide medical care while neutralizing terrorist threats is exactly the kind of skill set that we're looking for in our advanced programs. Maria considered the offer for a moment before responding. Captain Williams, I appreciate the opportunity, but I have patients who depend on me. People who need medical care in situations that are complicated enough without adding tactical considerations. Captain Williams nodded with understanding. Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez, I respect your decision, but if you ever change your mind, you know how to reach us. After Captain Williams left, Maria stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, looking up at the hospital where she had spent the last 3 years learning how to serve people in ways that didn't involve weapons or tactical operations. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, but it was her job. And sometimes, when the circumstances were exactly right and the stakes were high enough, even nursing positions require the kind of extraordinary measures that only came from 8 years of Navy SEAL training. Maria Rodriguez, registered nurse, walked back into Metropolitan General Hospital to begin another shift of monitoring patients, administering medications, and providing compassionate care to people who would never know how much protection they actually had. But Hospital Corpsman Maria, Doc, Rodriguez was always there too, just beneath the surface, ready to do whatever was necessary to keep innocent people safe from those who would do them harm. Because some skills once learned are never truly forgotten. And some warriors never really retire. They just find quieter ways to continue serving. Maria continued working at Metropolitan General Hospital, providing the same excellent nursing care that had made her valued by patients and colleagues for 3 years. But now there was an additional layer to her service. The knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be when people needed protection as much as they needed medical care. The terrorist attack had revealed Maria's true background to federal authorities and hospital administration, but she had requested that her military service record remain confidential to protect both her privacy and the operational security of the SEAL team she had served with. Most of her colleagues still knew her simply as Maria Rodriguez, the competent cardiac care nurse who had somehow helped coordinate the response to the terrorist attack. They didn't need to know that she was one of the most highly trained medical specialists in the American military. But occasionally, when the hospital faced particularly challenging emergencies or when patients required the kind of medical intervention that pushed the boundaries of conventional nursing practice, Maria's unique combination of medical expertise and tactical experience made her exactly the right person to have on duty. 6 months after the terrorist attack, Maria was working a night shift when a multi-vehicle accident brought 12 critically injured patients to Metropolitan General's emergency department. The influx of trauma cases overwhelmed the normal staffing levels and required every available medical professional to work at maximum capacity under extreme pressure. Maria found herself assigned to treat patients with injuries that were similar to combat wounds she had managed during her SEAL deployments. Penetrating trauma, massive blood loss, complex fractures, the kind of medical emergencies where seconds mattered and perfect technique was the difference between life and death. For 4 hours, Maria worked with the kind of calm precision and tactical medical expertise that saved lives while inspiring confidence in her colleagues and patients' families. Her ability to remain composed under pressure, make critical decisions without hesitation, and execute complex medical procedures with mechanical precision reminded everyone why she was considered one of the hospital's most valuable nurses. But more importantly, Maria's performance during the mass casualty event demonstrated that her transition from military service to civilian nursing had been successful not because she had abandoned her SEAL training, but because she had found ways to apply that training to serve people in new and meaningful ways. Maria Doc Rodriguez had spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL medical specialist, saving the lives of special operations personnel in the most dangerous places on Earth. Now, she was saving the lives of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, using the same skills and dedication that had made her one of the most effective combat medics in American military history. The difference was that now her patients went home to their families instead of returning to classified missions in hostile territory. And for Maria, that made every shift, every emergency, and every small act of compassionate medical care exactly the kind of service she had always wanted to provide. Some warriors transition from military service to civilian careers and spend years missing the intensity and purpose of their former roles. But Maria had discovered something better, a way to continue serving that combined the technical expertise and tactical training of her military background with the human compassion and healing mission that had motivated her to become a medical professional in the first place. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, protecting and healing people who never needed to know how much protection and healing she was capable of providing.